Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Collision Live. Daniel here, and joined at the desk, as I always am, by the Kansas farmhouse to my wicked witch of the east, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
Oh, not too much. It's good to be with you, not live on this live stream this time.
Yes, this is our not live edition of the Collision Live. Again, like we mentioned last week, me and Sam are here. Our future selves are watching this live stream probably. But our crew, Joni and Steven, are out on vacation doing crazy stuff out there in the world. So we thought we'd just pre-record this. I still want to thank you guys for still tuning in. And again, don't be shy with posting comments, sharing things. We'll still get back to those comments, even if we're not doing that in real time. But you know, the version of us out in the multiverse, we'll still love to have those conversations with you. But what's up? Anything going on? I guess not, because we're pre-recording this.
Yeah, not too much has happened since the last time we
Anything new in the last couple of hours since we recorded our last Collision Live?
Yeah, not too much. We are on the homestead. We've got a bunch of flowers growing now, and that's been a lot of fun. My wife and I have been growing a bunch of flowers, and we're getting a couple of new farm animals coming to visit.
Yeah, I think a couple of weeks ago you shared about your flowers and cultivating the earth, and a couple of weeks later, straight into consumerism and selling that cultivation.
Bye.
But that's cool. But we do have some stuff we're excited to talk about here at the Collision Live, some kind of more, again, general topics and things just to dialogue about, kind of take a Christian worldview to issues with pop culture and the arts, and just sort of how do we engage thoughtfully in culture. So again, welcome to the conversation. But let's kick things off like we always do here at the Collision Live with our first segment, Pop Culture News. So the first story happening, kind of a sad, somber story. Raise a glass to the iPod, making it after 21 years. It's bowing out. Apple just announced that they discontinued the iPod, no longer making that technology. You don't need it. Hey, it will always be near and dear to our hearts. Another thing that jumped out to me, Prey. I don't know if this is necessarily something that is going to be widely a lot of interest, but I'm a sucker for these sort of things. So this is a prequel movie to the Predator movies, the original featuring good old Arnold Schwarzenegger. This thing I think is releasing on Hulu. The first trailer dropped, and I'm excited, but again, I'm exactly the target audience for this sort of thing, so I'm excited for that. One of the bigger stories that's been going on, and kind of how this thing's being unpacked. Netflix kind of made some ripples on social media. They kind of updated their cultural kind of the memo that they send out, and trying to their employees and people working on these shows. And I encourage you to check it out. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there to unpack. But basically, Netflix from the top up, kind of speaking down to the workers, saying, hey, here we make a lot of shows. You're not going to agree with all of them. You might have some problems with all of them, but that's just sort of the nature of sort of entertainment and having kind of wide, diverse stuff on our platform. And if that's a problem, then Netflix might not be the best place for you to work. And again, there's a lot of stuff to unpack with that, but just kind of the new sea to navigate with these entertainment things, and just a lot of like the activism and people trying to get upset about what's on there. And I think especially with like some of the Dave Chappelle stuff inspired this, so definitely going to be following that story. A big story that just dropped actually this morning. Again, we're pre-recording, so this isn't necessarily breaking news like it was when we're recording this live, but Variety magazine just released kind of a super long, in-depth article about kind of the state of Star Wars and all the different properties and movies and shows. And there's a bunch of stuff. If you're a geeky Star Wars nerd, you've probably already read this article, but a lot of stuff that maybe hadn't been unpacked as much, like The Acolyte, one of the shows that's coming to Disney Plus, I think next year, kind of revealing some more stuff about this, that it's set like 100 years before Episode 1, kind of back in like the glory days of like the Republic and all that stuff. A lot of cool stuff. Another one, I don't think it has a name yet, but the Spider-Man director is still in Star Wars, but the Spider-Man director is doing this, and basically Goonies in space, so sign me up. But the last story for us, the family-based film Family Camp. I had not heard of this thing. I'm not necessarily one to, I don't mark these on my calendar, all these faith-based films, but this thing I came across in like a Deadline reporter, one of these magazine trades, because it broke into the top 10 of the box office, which is kind of crazy. I think it's still like a limited release. Like the numbers aren't necessarily anything to, it's not like challenging Avatar or anything, but hey, faith-based films, films made by Christians are having more and more kind of success. So good on Family Camp. But that's all we have this week in pop culture news. So any of these stories, anything stand out to you for pop culture?
Yeah, well, I would say one thing, if you were wondering why we're not talking about that thing that just happened yesterday, it's because we don't know what yesterday holds because we're from the past.
Yeah, we're projecting ourselves into the future.
Yeah, but I did see the iPod. That was sort of a RIP moment for the iPod. But yeah, like, do you remember your first iPod?
I do. I remember. I forget why I got it. I did something good, and I think my dad was proud of me, so he went and bought me. It was like
didn't run home from school.
Yeah, I didn't run home and change things up. I was a good kid for once, and it was like the OG, like the original, like the white kind of the spin wheel.
Yeah.
I remember like thinking it was so cool that I could have like 250 songs.
I know.
Not have to change anything, and like
no CDs.
And now, like in my pocket, I have like 10,000 metal songs on my phone. It's crazy. I think I still have. I don't have the original iPod because I think I had to send it in and they replaced it with a newer one. But I do have my iPod Shuffle.
Okay, I have like a touch shuffle that you could also get like a watch band for it. This was like somewhat later, but not like the original shuffle with just like the buttons on it. But yeah, that was.
So hey, the iPod, it shook things up, but hey, time moves on, so we'll remember it in our hearts. And the faith-based family camp, I like I said, I know nothing about this.
Yeah, I've never
in general,
heard of it.
like I probably hate 9 of 10 of these types of movies.
Mm-hmm.
But I was trying to like look up to see if there was like reviews or like what any of the buzz was. Obviously, a lot of people are seeing it, and I didn't find a whole lot.
Nobody's reviewing it.
I saw on somewhere that I think like Rotten Tomatoes, something they didn't send out screeners or anything. So usually that's not a good sign if they don't want people to review it till the last minute. But I do think, hey, we kind of poo-poo on faith-based films, and a lot of times there's good reasons to. But it is cool that when there's people.
Yeah, one of them breaks.
God can be used
breaks through the noise.
And I don't know how like evangelistic and stuff it is, but hey, using the arts in creative ways, we should affirm that, even if we're not necessarily flocking to the theater.
Speaking of things we should affirm, Star Wars is always.
And Star Wars. I'm excited for that. I miss Star Wars in the theater. Excited for all these shows. Hey, but Star Wars to me is something that you see in the big screen.
Yeah.
Like I remember growing up. So I'm excited for these movies to start coming out. And again, my kids are now old enough that I can take them to the theaters. So hey, can never have too much Star Wars. But another thing that is an important experience that we have is worship. Our first topic to kind of get into. This is actually based on an article that we just released about worship. Again, I'm projecting into the future, so I don't necessarily know what this article is called. I just know I've been writing about worship, and it is kind of coming out of a lot of the stuff that I've just been thinking about personally about worship, and what's the point of worship? How the arts, and just as a member of the church. And I know we've touched on some of this stuff. It's kind of been like a theme with like some rituals, and we talked about Christian songs a couple weeks ago, and like the state of that and why we have so many and why they're changing so much. And but I thought we could kind of dialogue a bit about just sort of worship, kind of more broad picture a bit, but sort of like is worship like I think it's become commonplace to talk about like the worship experience, and we kind of even like oftentimes like at the end of a worship service, people leaving the church and wasn't that just a great time of worship, right? We sort of, I don't know, we talk about it as sort of this thing that we did, and I don't know, I think I've kind of been wrestling with that a bit. Like, is that the best way? Like, is worship just sort of this like heightened experience? Like, as the church, like, are we focusing too much on like trying to like make this sort of spiritual high, or like have we lost something? Like, I don't know. What do you?
Yeah, no, and it's something I've been thinking about too as well. And I think when we worship, I feel like has almost just become sort of a shorthand or whatever for the service that you have at your church. Like, that's worship, and we even call it like the worship service. Is sort of what we call back in the day we would call big church, but the worship service, or when someone says worship, what they really mean is that time where you're together with the church and you're singing songs. Like, that's like, I think when you say worship, that's what people think of, and that's exactly sort of where their mind goes. And but yeah, like you, I wonder if that's not the best way to describe what that is because of sort of the implications that that means for like everything else that you do and like the other 99.99% of your life that you live that's not at a worship service.
Yeah, because the verse that kind of came to mind that I was been thinking about with this is Romans 12:1, where it says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." And obviously, I think you can say that like the worship service at church, like it is a kind of a different type of worship. Like it's corporate. It's
Yeah.
it is there is a different dimension to it than and you're gathering kind of together as like the full body. That is different than just like praising God in your drive, your commute. Like I there is differences, but kind of like when you look at the Bible though, like it talks about singing songs and worship, but like the idea of worship, at least like in this verse, like you're offering your body is like more of like a transformational, like it's worship is sort of allowing God to like shape you and mold you and like change you and like conform you more to the image of Jesus. And it's less kind of about this like this great feeling that we had, or we just it's less sort of like a very expressive like worship's when we get together and we just sort of express our feelings and not that we shouldn't express that we our love for God, but I don't know, I think some of that actually is more influenced by like wider trends in culture and very individualistic, and it's all about feelings and expressions. It's almost more about like how we feel, how worship's making us feel, rather than like just transform me or like
well, it's certainly the songs that we sing tend to have a lot of emphasis on the singer and not God, and it's like whether it's about like the way that we feel or that we relate to God or the things that God has done for us. And, it's good to be grateful, obviously, for the things that God has done for us. But I feel like most of the time it's very sort of a self-centered sort of expression it ends up being. And then again, I think that sort of excludes, that verse talks about present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Well, like that's sort of a holistic, I think, approach to worship, whereas what ends up happening is we sort of see our worship as that thing that we do on Sunday mornings with other believers. And what it does is it kind of gives us license, or we think less about our worship, outside of that time. And so we end up just sort of like compartmentalizing, like, well, worship is the thing with the songs and the pastor. And then I'm also just going to live my life, not that you're living wrong or worldly, but you're not living your life presenting your body as a living sacrifice.
Yeah, and one of the things, again, we're not going to get into all the article stuff. One, because I haven't finished writing it, but also just because you can check it out in the written form and kind of get into it. But one of the things I'm doing in that article is just sort of trying to think through, like, as the church, and again, churches, there's lots of different churches, and churches do things differently, but like, are we structuring even this, like our services and like our church in such a way that like it's sort of fostering that more holistic, like transformational, or are we treating it more as like a very like, it's like not a performance, but I guess like a thing it's an event.
It's an event.
Sort of emotional. And like two of the things that I kind of have been thinking about. One is just like the building. I know we've got into this before, but like kind of like one of the side effects of like it's not a religion, it's a relationship thing, is like, which is good theology, but like we sort of devalued like there's nothing in most churches like before you get into the sanctuary that is at all sort of like preparing you for worship. Like it maybe prepares you for like fellowship, and like there's coffee and there's hangout spots and there's information and announcements, but like very little like art or like just anything that would like start, like it's almost like worship happens in the sanctuary. And before you get there, just fellowship, hang out, laugh, like
build community before you get there. And that's sort of, I think, again, there's nothing wrong with building community, there's nothing wrong with fellowshipping with other believers before you worship. But there is no it feels like there's been very little thought put into how do you like lay out your building or your even your campus or your church yard or whatever in such a way that it's drawing people in to worship even before they're like sitting in a pew or a chair or whatever in the actual service. So like what groundwork is being done to get you to a place that can be honoring to the Lord when you're in a worship service. And yeah, I don't know that a whole lot. I could be wrong, and if folks listening or watching have experience with, has your church been very intentional in like cultivating that sense of worship, sense of awe as you really proceed into the sanctuary? Let us know, like share with us what you've experienced that is. But I think most of our experience has been,
well, because it's like because we talk about like entering into the presence of God and the house of God but it's almost like we treat it like God doesn't show up though until like he's on the count. Like,
yeah, we got to sing that fire fall song first,
like God, because the other and again this is I will die on this hill happily. But one of my biggest pet peeves, and we don't have. We don't have the time to go to, but like even like the countdown timers in church is like nothing drives me more crazy on planet Earth than like the countdown timer. Like all churches do it. Our church does it. My brother's church does it. Like every church I've ever attended in the last little bit does it. But like and you're probably familiar with it. There's like we got 5 minutes till worship starts, and like this is like fancy, and like it's like playing like dance music, and like so it's almost like even when you're in the sanctuary, like it's like those timers really don't do anything other than like affirm that like you're here. We're gonna worship, but like we're not worshiping yet.
Not yet.
Like,
yeah. Put a pause on it. If you're feeling anything.
Don't start. Is your heart being stirred to worship? Don't worry. Turn up the dance music. And like I don't know. Like I get that it helps people to like ease in, but like it's almost like then like you flip a switch when it hits zero. Then it's like now we're worshiping and we're in the presence of God and this is an emotional thing and like. But like nothing about like the lead up to that, or like the way we've structured the service, really like captures this like the reverence aspect of like it becomes more of this like this thing we do. Like you get your chair, you wait till the timer goes on, it happens.
And again, I think that is a very sort of a Protestant problem, because I think it also sort of it just totally bypasses the body, right? Like the biology, if you will, like. We like to just think of ourselves as like thinking, conscious people, but we ignore like our body and like the things that we should be doing that tell our mind that no, we should be like coming into a place of worship. And so, so we start the music, and it's like we expect us to just sort of suddenly with like the light
0 to 100 of like
suddenly we're gonna have this magical experience because we said now is the time to do it. And you've done no prep work. There've been no clues up until now that you should be preparing your heart for worship. And we all talk about, don't stay up late on Saturday night, or there's these things that we'll say that are like you need to prepare, and that's all good. But once you get on to your church property, there's no indication typically that like you should be preparing for worship. It's totally just like ignore that until we
almost go out of our way to like prevent people from preparing their hearts, like because we treat, or we don't always do that, but like treat it as this like experience. Again, we don't have time to super get into that, but even just I think one of the problems with that is like when we structure it in a way that like worship is this thing we do, and it's this like spiritual high hour-long thing, like then like it's hard, I think, when we've done so much to kind of emphasize that, like then like we think if worship starts here at this time, then like people naturally are going to think that worship ends when you leave that place, that time is over.
When that song ends.
But I do get into that in more detail, kind of unpack it a bit. We don't have time to get into it deeper on this show. But I do think it is something to think about. Not like here's what's wrong with the church, capital C church, everything does it wrong. If I led the church, I would do it right. It's not that kind of thing. But I do think like if what we do as Christians is worship is like the thing we do, then we should be intentional about thinking like, are we actually doing that as we should, or are we kind of just driven by these trendy things that, hey, this is what they do and this makes people comfortable, and actually missing out on like leading people into worship. So let us know, and especially if you're involved in doing worship and stuff, how you kind of navigate that, if that's something you've thought about or if you've heard feedback about. But something that I know has been thought through a lot and is also something that we need to think about. The next segment of our show, we have Host Corner.
All right, so this week is my week, and we've talked here several times about nostalgia, the importance of nostalgia, and so I thought I came across this great little internet find. I think it's called thepuddle.com, And for those watching, you can see it on the screen here. You can scroll through. I think it goes back to maybe the 50s, and you can see the top like 100 Billboard songs that they actually play. So this, you go to this website. It like these the titles and the artists are kind of scrolling through. You're going through month by month, and like the number one song and the number five song, they're kind of switching all over the place. And you're hearing the songs come out. So if you just want to go down sort of a nostalgic rabbit hole and play music, down through the decades, maybe when you were like a teenager, when you were a kid, it is just, my wife and I were doing this the other day, and it is just super fun to go back and see all of like the hits. Like, oh, I completely forgot about that song, and I know all the words to it. So it's super fun. I think it's called thepuddle.com, and I just thought it was a really neat little thing to see what was happening back in the day musically.
So I will admit, we talked about Venn diagrams last week. Like, usually your host corner is like the things that you're interested in the host corner, and like the things I'm interested in. There's like two circles with very little overlap.
Yeah.
But this is one of the exceptions. Like, this actually sounds interesting. What was the top song when you were born?
I did. I don't remember. I think it may have been some Elton John song, probably. But I should have looked up the song when I was born. But it's funny. Like you're going through like early 2000s, and like you've seen like NSYNC and I don't know, like Shakira and like all these like pop hits and stuff. And you just can just go like even further back, and you see like more back in like the rock and roll days, and I don't know. It's really really fascinating, and it's cool because it's animated, so you see it's kind of the scrolling thing where you just see like his was a hit song and it was a hit for like a month, or like it was a hit for like some of them like you hardly even see it because it kind of pops in and out. Or so what got us thinking about this was Carrie had found one of her old pop punk CDs from back in the day, and I too listened to some pop punk as a kid. And so I was like, oh, we should look at this thing. And so it was just kind of neat to go through it.
My kind of metalhead enlightenment when I was introduced to metal, before those in the darker days, I was a pop punk kid. I listened to some, even like we didn't mention in the pop culture news, but like My Chemical Romance, like this emo rock band. Like, when we're recording, the week we're recording this, like just came out with a new song, and like Sam texted me right away, and like I just had the same thought of like our childhood, the songs we grew up with. The inner emo child within me was awakening. But hey, it's interesting. I will definitely check that out and see. I'm hoping it's some cool metal song that when I was born, but it's probably some terrible like pop music.
Michael Jackson, "Man in the Mirror" was the spring of when I was born. That was
fitting. Do you find yourself thinking
about the Man in the Mirror?
Thinking about the Man in the Mirror.
Yeah.
Hey, so I will admit, sometimes Sam he doesn't always deliver with his host corners, but sometimes
they're usually esoteric. Sometimes
he brings,
every once in a while there's broad appeal.
He brings the good stuff. But our next topic, so this is actually another one that we've kind of been thinking about, and even like talking about, like just outside of the collision and outside of the live streams, and there's sort of kind of a biblical way of thinking about like work and like the value of that, and like as a Christian perspective, like on like work, and not just like labor work, but it's like creating and like kind of what we're called to do as Christians, and like whether we necessarily value that. Like, it's something that we've sort of been talking about. And hey, you know what? We've been having these conversations. Why don't we do it in one of our live streams to fill another topic? But I know this is something you've been thinking about. So why don't you?
Well, I had read a book a while back. I think it was called Garden City. By John Mark Comer, and it kind of got me thinking about just sort of the nature of work, and the fact that one of the if you go back in Genesis, even before the fall, God is putting Adam and Eve in the garden, and he tells Adam, like, you're going to work the land, like you're going to work this garden, like this is going to be your work. And I think in today's culture, I think we have this idea that work is sort of this necessary evil that has to take place in order to like do all the things that you want to do. To live, you have to work, and all this stuff. And the goal would be to not work. But I think sort of surveys and studies throughout the years have shown that actually if you don't work, that's sort of a recipe for like an extremely miserable life. And I think it's not surprising because I think Scripture bears that out, that we are created to work. And I think all the more reason to find that work, that specific work that we're created to do, and not just think of it as some sort of necessary means to do all the fun stuff you would rather be doing.
Yeah, kind of like this means to an end. And again, in theology, sort of that is sometimes called like the creative mandate, based on like Genesis 1:28, which says, God blessed them, so you can, about Adam and Eve. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the seas and the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. And then kind of following that, Genesis 2:15, which says, the Lord took the man and put him in the garden of Eden to till it and to keep it. And this sort of this idea that like we were created, like the first thing that we're told to do is like to work, to like have dominion, to create, to care for the earth, and that is not framed in like this is pre-fall.
Right. That's, I mean, paradise is working in a garden, which I tend to like love because, you know, we plant food and we have flowers and we do a lot of like outdoor gardening type work, but paradise there was work in paradise. And I think that's sort of like in today's culture, that's such sort of a shocker. That's like, wait a second, like the original intent was to actually work before sin ever entered the picture.
That's again, as you guys, some of you guys might know, like I'm obsessed with Eden. Like the whole concept of like the Garden of Eden is just one of those things that like I'm just endlessly intrigued about and like to study and read about, and like just sort of what does that mean, like the significance, and what did that do to us like spiritually to leave the garden. And like kind of one of the things that I've realized, hopefully this isn't like a hot take, but like some of my understandings even of that is like we kind of see like that almost like the tragedy of Eden is that like they leave the garden, which if you read like what they were called to do in Eden is to go and like multiply and fill the earth. Like, you know, they weren't able to like fulfill that just in the garden. Like the fact that they left the garden, I think, when you kind of read all of Scripture, like was always going to happen. Like they were going to spend forever. Like they were going to have kids. They were going to spread. You know, the world wasn't just sort of this evil place and only the garden. Like I think the tragedy of Eden is like that they can't go back. That like they lost that connection with God.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like, you know, work and stuff is not just like this is a consequence that because you messed up paradise, you got to go into this evil world and then you got to work. And that is like, hey, no, the plan I think from the beginning from God was to like, you know, almost like Eden I've talked about before is like almost like a training ground to like go make the world like Eden, like make it like a garden and till it and care for it and kind of learn to do it there. But like I do think it is significant that that is what we're called to do, and that's before sin. And that is sort of the plan. You know, even Eden, paradise was a place where we worked and like made stuff and like I don't know. Do you think like we've lost like I know like we live, at least us here in like America, like we're such like a pragmatic kind of like culture, like utilitarian, that like work is, because even like as an artist and stuff, like we even treat like that kind of making and creating oftentimes very like, what's the function? Like, you know, you have a story, but like, what's the function? Is that going to like, is that evangelistic? Is that this? Is that going to, are you trying to do that to like make connections, build bridges in the secular market? And like, it's sort of like, we've lost a sense of just like, no, I'm creating stuff because I'm working. I'm making things like.
Well, again, I mean, I think, you know, I was reading a book on prayer recently, and it talked about how God really only works in the present, right? This idea that God's not doing stuff for you, you know, in the future. Again, we don't have to get into the whole time thing, but like his will for you is right now, in a sense. And so, but we're a culture that we spend most of our time sort of in the future, like, well, that next thing, this weekend, or, you know, we spend it sort of looking back at the past, like, oh, the good old days or whatever. And very rarely are we capable of sort of like being in the present and doing the thing that God's called us to do, like today, now. And I think it's the same with work, because I think, and again, not to go back to, you know, the greatness of like working with the land and like agriculture, in a sense, and sort of animal husbandry and that sort of stuff. But when you do that, there's just sort of an innate satisfaction that comes. Like, yes, it's hard work, there's toil, it can be heartbreaking, but there's something that's at least for me, extremely satisfying when you plant something, you see it grow, you see it mature, you reap a harvest from that. Same with like animals, raising animals. There's an inherent goodness about the work that's being done there, and I think now, for a lot of people, there is not or at least they don't see an inherent goodness in the work that they're doing, and it may be that you need to change the sort of work that you do. Like, maybe there isn't, something that you can find good about the work that you're doing. But I think most people, if you're doing meaningful work, there can be a good that can be innate in that, and not just this is good because it helps pay for the things that I want or gives me, the weekends that I live for or whatever. And it's less about the work and more about what happens outside of work.
And even just like, again, piggybacking even off like the first topic of this episode is like just sort of that worship, like the fact of like work being worship, or like what we do, or like how we create, like beyond just like the function or like the results of, I create this and it made this many converts, so that's good. But like just the idea that like as you create whatever that is, and I think you can do that in like any kind of field, that there's value and like worship in that. And like I think sometimes even like I remember something that's a conversation that stands out to me is like again, it was when I was younger, but just a very like real hardworking, like manual labor friend of mine who was struggling with church. I remember him saying like church just doesn't really have a place for people like me. Like, and what he meant by that is like, if he were to be like called to be a pastor or something, like they would bring him up to the front of the church and like there'd be a place for him, and like sort of some of that more ministry stuff where like, they want to say like results and stuff, but that we don't always just like treat like just hard work, labor. I don't know. We don't always like elevate that as like a, like maybe we talk about it, like they can maybe use that or be a missionary in that field.
Yeah.
But we don't necessarily value like, but it's also just worship that you're doing that.
Right.
Thing.
The fact that you're working hard, you're being recognized for the work that you do, that is an act of worship. And yeah, I think you're right. And this maybe gets into a different area, but the church is very good at like elevating and praising those who feel called into ministry or feel called into missions, that those like sort of the professional Christian class, if you will. But nothing is ever mentioned about the plumbers, the welders, the farmers, the doctors, the lawyers. I mean, any other profession that you can think of, which are most of them are callings. Like I think there's a lot of callings that fall outside of the professional Christian callings, and but very little is sort of mentioned or sort of celebrated about that. And again, like you said, we celebrate if it's like you can use your practice to like minister to the less fortunate, and that has a result that the church sort of approves of in a way, and less about like, no, it's the fact that you're a really, really good doctor and like you're doing the thing that you've been called to do, and that is an act of worship to God in and of itself, not just like converts that happen at your place, or some sort of good deed that you're able to do sort of in addition to the calling of the work that you have.
Yeah, which is even, again, I'm a huge Tolkien guy, but like part of why I think I connect so much with Tolkien is like, even if you look at some like old interviews and stuff that he did, like he gets like interviewed by these like religious people, and like it's like, why did you make these like worlds and this fantasy and stuff? And like it's almost like the question like doesn't compute. He's like, because like why not? Because like I was created, and like my God's a creator, and I create like this sort of that, like, that it's this natural thing to like make and work and kind of build stuff and add new things, and like that is valuable beyond just sort of this like very functional. So I don't know, especially if you are just sort of in one of those, like I said, not the professional Christian, and I do think there is like, 'cause like even scripture like focuses more on like ministers and stuff. Because it is sort of a special calling within the church, and again, these letters are working to
and
the church.
It's not to downplay those roles.
Yeah, but I do think as the church, we are there ways that we can just sort of value the work and this, the skill that God's gifted us and stuff. So let us know, especially if you are someone that maybe works more with your hands or just whatever you do.
Yeah.
Have you always felt valued in the church? How do you use your gifts sort of as an act of worship? We'd love to have those conversations with you. But then last segment of our show this week at the Collision, again, like I said, we're pre-recording this, so I'm trying to transport my mind into whatever is coming out a week from now. But we should have our review of Downton Abbey: A New Era. Will be up on our channel, and also hopefully a written review. Haven't seen it yet. Don't know if I like it, but check out to hear my thoughts for that. And then again, we have 2 new articles. Encourage you guys to check them out. One, kind of going kind of a deeper, more in depth about sort of this worship and experience, and what are we doing as a church to kind of foster that more holistic worship and less than just sort of this emotional spiritual high that we do for an hour on Sunday. And then also, if you haven't checked it out, our article from last week, the 5 more classic novels that every Christian should read. Encourage you to check that out. Let me know your own favorite books. But any kind of final thoughts for us?
Well, I just can't wait for the next 5 more.
How long can we milk this thing? Hey, there's a lot of books that I would love to talk about. So hey, if you guys keep reading those articles, then I will keep writing them. But hey,
gladly,
book people are the best. But I want to thank you guys for joining us for our not live stream. Next week we will be back and we will be live. So I encourage you to join us then and join the conversation with whatever crazy stuff is going on. We'll have 2 weeks worth of crazy cultural stuff by then, so there'll be plenty to talk about. But stay safe, guys, and continue to collide with your world for Christ.